Sundays after Pentecost, the Sundays after Epiphany. For us, that's not a season. We have seasons. We have Advent. We have Lent. We have the Easter season. We have Christmas season and things like that. But the green, it's marking time. And if anyone is ever in the military and you learned to march, okay? Hopefully you did, but especially if you were in a band, marking time is just doing this, okay? For us, the masses in green are marking time. It's filled. But when something more important, like the Feast of an Apostle, comes along, you celebrate that feast. The Feast of St. James the Greater is a double of the second class, almost like Christmas in classification. The ninth Sunday after Pentecost that it's bumping is a semi-double, which is the next to the lowest kind of class. So, anyway, but we commemorate the Sunday. You notice that the gospel at the end will not be the typical one from St. John, but will be the gospel of the ninth Sunday after Pentecost, because we still commemorate the Sunday. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about, and there is so much to talk about, but I know you've been hearing all the stuff about the Pope's new document and stuff like that, and you don't need me to go over that too much. I'm sure you've heard enough analysis of that. Really, I want to give you strength and clarity and direction in this issue. The devil rules through confusion, through irrationality, through doubt. That's how the devil. When there's clarity and reason, the devil is dissipated. And so he's doing his best to introduce a great confusion on the poor faithful these days. And so really my whole job is to dispel this confusion and give you a way to go. Tell you what the church has always taught about certain things, and to help dispel this awful confusion that's starting to reign amongst poor Catholics the world over. Now, as it comes to the traditional Latin Mass, I'll go back further in time in a minute, but let's just go back to Vatican II, which wanted a reform. They mentioned a reform of the liturgy. Now, what this meant was they wanted it, cleaned up. If it had any accretions or anything that had crept into the missal over however many years, they wanted that weeded out, and they wanted it returned to the form it was supposed to be, and they wanted the liturgy to be taught to the people so they understood what was happening in the liturgy. So that was what they meant by reform. How do I know this? The archbishop who ordained me a deacon was a council father. He was at Vatican II. He was there in the thick of it, and he told me, we didn't want any of this new Mass business. That was the furthest thing from our minds. We wanted people to understand the traditional Latin Mass better and stuff like that. So this was their purpose. In any case, a committee that had been formed, headed by 2 Freemasons and also had on it 6 Protestant ministers, was commissioned by Paul VI to write a new Mass. Now, this had never been done in the history of the Church. Nobody sat down and wrote this Mass that I'm saying today. Our Lord Jesus Christ was on earth for 40 days before his ascension back into heaven. He showed the apostles how to say Mass, how to run the church, how to do the other sacraments. What do you think he did for 40 days? Appeared and occasionally ate a piece of fish, We don't have it all recorded specifically in the Bible, which, the Protestants will say, well, it's not in the Bible. However, we have the evidence from the first century that shows, we have these books from the first century and these copies of the books that show the church already had a defined liturgy in the apostolic age while the apostles were still alive on earth. And that didn't just happen, okay? Well, in any case, Paul VI commissioned this group headed by Freemasons. Now, Freemasons are not here to do good to the church. They're here to do harm to the church, to destroy. They're infiltrators. They are the KGB of the world on the church level kind of thing. They weren't there to do any good. They were there to do destruction. So anyway, they created a liturgy which was not, well, first of all, it was a violation of church law, but it was also not overly Catholic. In fact, when I told you about the rationalists that don't believe in supernatural activity, one of the things they took out of the new Mass was any mention of the supernatural. In our Mass, we have many mentions of the miracles that the saints did. There's not one mention of any miracle that any saint did in the new Mass. You see, this is part of what they did. That's almost another day's work. So what happened is they had an experimental Mass, not the new Mass totally, between 1965 and 1969. This you could still somewhat recognize as the Mass. But then in 1969, they came out with the new Mass. We call it the Novus Ordo. Novus Ordo is short for Novus Ordo Missae, the new order of Mass that they came out with. That came out in 1969. And what they did is they tried to give the impression, and for all practical purposes they did, that the old Mass had been suppressed, that you could no longer say the old Mass, the traditional Mass, that you had to say their newfangled Mass, okay? They gave that impression, and the way they gave the impression is they knew they couldn't do it in law. So what they did was any priest that continued to offer the traditional Latin Mass, they persecuted, okay, from the very beginning. And so we have the beginning of the traditionalist movement amongst these priests. The reason I'm mentioning this is sometime later, we move up to 1984, we have the first what they call indult of John Paul II, giving priests permission under certain conditions to say the traditional Mass. Now, I know because I talked to cardinals at the time I didn't talk to John Paul II, but I did talk to some of his cardinals that I knew. And he was under the impression that the only people who really wanted the old Mass were old ladies in tennis shoes who were going to die soon anyway, and just, I want to hear that old Latin Mass one more time, before I die. But he found out later he was wrong. It was young people and young families coming to the traditional Mass when he permitted it. And he actually died lamenting this. He had a second indult in 1988 called Ecclesia Dei, which formed what they call the Ecclesia Dei Commission, which was supposed to look after traditional Catholics. I always called it, from the time it was formed, because I was over there in Italy at the time, I called it, let's put all our traditional eggs in one basket so we can throw the basket overboard, okay? And that's what it was from the beginning. Later on, Benedict XVI came out with Summorum Pontificum, and you have to realize Benedict is a true liberal. What's a true liberal? A true liberal doesn't care what you do. You want the old Mass, fine, go do your thing. You want the new Mass, fine. You want clowns, you want dances, you want pachamamas. I don't care. I'm a liberal, okay? And so that's what a true liberal is. Benedict XVI was a true liberal. And he goes, if people want that old Mass, let them have it, so what, okay? And so he made another indult with more conditions. Now, just before I read to you what I want to read to you here, let me tell you the actual truth about the teaching of the church and what's going on here. We didn't need the two indults of John Paul II. We didn't need the indult of Benedict XVI. Because of this, I'm going to read you in a minute, no one can suppress or limit the traditional Mass, not even a pope, and especially not a pope. We have this idea, the Pope can make all these rules, and whatever rules he makes, that's what it is, that's the law of the church. No, the Pope can't do whatever he wants. For example, Pius XII defined the dogma of the Assumption. Do you think that, or much as he'd probably like to do it, that Francis could come along and say, oh no, there was no Assumption. No, it didn't happen, never happened. Obviously, he's limited by what his predecessors did. Well, with regards to the traditional Mass, nobody can even limit it, let alone impose conditions for saying it or say you can't say it, okay? It is against church teaching, is it against church law to even try to. So all they had to do, all JP2 had to do, or Benedict XVI, is say, you don't need an adult, everybody. All your pastors and priests can get up tomorrow morning, walk to the church, and say the traditional Latin Mass all they want to, and nobody can do anything about it. Okay, but now we have, but they've been trying. They've been trying by lies and falsehoods to give the impression that they have the power to limit it. Now, why can't they limit it? Because of what I'm about to reveal to you. Most of you know this. I know in a great sense I'm preaching to some, which is preaching to the choir, as they say, people who already know it. But there's many who don't, and I need you to be firm in your faith about this one. First of all, a quirk of canon law, if you want to. Even if we had no church teaching on the traditional Mass, but that's the more important part for me, that we do have church teaching on the traditional Latin Mass. But let's say we didn't. How long have we been doing the traditional Mass? Oh, let me see, 2,000 years? Well, there's a law in canon law called the right of immemorial custom. If somebody's been doing a rite in the church for over 200 years, no one can stop it. Not even the Pope. And that says that in canon law. No one can stop it. So, clearly, because of the right of immemorial custom, they can stop it. But for one other thing. Now, let me go back to the 16th century, the 1500s, for those who have trouble keeping track of things like that, like me. So the 1500s, which is the 16th century, what was arising? Protestantism. Henry VIII, 1536, whatever, and all through, Henry VIII, Melanchthon, Calvin, Zwingli, Luther, okay? There was a new threat to the church. And so the Pope called an ecumenical council. Ecumenical is the Greek word for housekeeping. You dust your house, you're being ecumenical, technically, okay? That's as ecumenical as I get, actually, dusting my house. Okay, but that's what it means. What it means is to do get your house in order, your internal affairs. That's what an ecumenical council is for. So the Pope called an ecumenical council to define things against and the errors of Protestantism and to make the church unified against Protestantism. So what it did, it met in 2 sessions over several years, and it defined many, many things. It's the greatest council in the history of the church. One of the things it defines is we had to have a form of the sacraments that was set and could never be changed from that point on into eternity, okay? And they dealt with baptism, they dealt with a few other things, but they didn't have time really to deal with all 7 sacraments. Why? Because they had to get back to their dioceses to do their own business as bishops, okay? So what they said was, okay, we haven't got time to deal with the Mass, and then the adjunct to the Mass, which is the prayer book the priests and nuns use called the breviary. They said, we will give our ecumenical authority to saying this is continuing the work of the Council of Trent for a future Pope to get the one version of that together. Okay, so brings us around to the time of Pope Pius V, later canonized, one of the greatest popes in the history of the church, Pope Saint Pius V, who was a Dominican, by the way. Have you ever seen the Dominican habit? Do you know what it looks like? It's white. Why do popes wear white to this day? Because of Pius V. They were red before that. But he was such a great force and most wonderful pope they had ever seen in life that popes in respect have worn white ever since. That's the origin of that. Anyway, so Pope St. Pius V was the one who was responsible for putting out the definitive edition of the Roman Missal, which is the Mass book that we use to say Mass out of, okay? Which he said was the work of the continuation of the Council of Trent, and its conclusions were infallible. They weren't a liturgical opinion. It wasn't a discipline. It wasn't anything like that. It was the infallible work of the council being concluded. And so what did they do? Okay, he didn't write a liturgy. He didn't have anyone else write a Mass. What they did is they go, we need one Mass for the entire Western Church, the Roman rite of the Church. And so what they did is They took the missal as it was, and they took anything out of it that didn't have to be there, kind of thing. Okay? And you'll say, well, what's that? What important thing? Some things like some of the sequences, like in the funeral mass, we have the Dies Irae. It's a poem that you say before the gospel, essentially. At Easter time, we have the Victimae Paschali Laudes. There are different times of the year, Corpus Christi, Lauda Sian Salvatorum. Well, what had happened over the years is in some missals, it had become full of these poems. Okay, and so what they said, well, we don't need all these poems. Let's get rid of the ones we don't want, and let's make one missal for the entire church. So he set the best people to work at it at a time. And essentially what they did is they codified the missal of the Roman Curia. So the way Mass was said in Rome, the book they used for the Mass, the way it was said in Rome, they said, this is going to be the one missal for the entire Western Church. See, lockstep, you got to regroup, so they regrouped, right? Regroup, and then march lockstep out of there. And that's what they did. Okay, so the document that Pius V introduced, very important for us, introduced the final work of the Trent with, the codification of the Missal, is called Quo Primum, Q-U-O, 2 words, P-R-I-M-U-M, okay? Now, it means like from the beginning, this sort of thing. They take the name of the document out of the first few words of the document itself. And he came out with that, and I want to go over that with you. It's not too long. So you know what it says. This is an infallible document of the Pope, who made it very clear this was infallible. And you'll hear the modernists say, well, one Pope can't bind another in discipline. This isn't just discipline. The Mass is faith and morals. And when the Pope speaks a certain way about faith and morals, he uses infallibility. Okay? So this is faith and morals. If the Mass isn't faith and morals, what is? You know? Okay? So this was given July 14th. Had I remembered that, I would have had an extra glass of champagne on July 14th. I don't know what I was doing then. Oh, next year. July 14, 1570. And he says, upon our elevation to the apostolic throne, we gladly turned our mind and our energies and directed all our thoughts to the matter of preserving incorrupt the public worship of the Church. Now, mind you, preserving, not writing a new Mass, which is what they did after Vatican II. That's not preserving. If you're preserving something, you're taking something that is and keeping it for the future. Okay, that's preserving. So, to the matter of preserving incorrupt the public worship of the Church. And we have striven with God's help by every means in our power to achieve that purpose. Whereas amongst other decrees of the Holy Council of Trent, we were charged with revision and reissue of the sacred books, to wit, the Catechism, the Missal, and the Breviary. And whereas we have, with God's consent, published a catechism for the instruction of the faithful, and thoroughly revised the Breviary for the due performance of the divine office, we next, in order that Missal and Breviary might be in perfect harmony, deemed it necessary to give our immediate attention to what still remained to be done, namely the re-editing of the Missal without the least possible delay. We resolved accordingly to delegate this task to a select committee of scholars, and they, having at every stage of their work and with the utmost care, collated the ancient codices in our Vatican library and reliable codices from elsewhere, and have also consulted the writing of ancient and approved authors, who have bequeathed to us records relating to the said sacred rites, thus restored the Missal itself to the pristine form and rite of the Holy Fathers. Restored. What does restored mean? You take something and you put it back to a form that was before, okay? The new Missal that they use in the parishes never existed before. It's not restored anything. It's as restored as Mao's Little Red Book or, Karl Marx's works, okay? That it's not restored. When this production had been subjected to close scrutiny and further amended, we, after mature consideration, ordered that the final result be forthwith printed and published in Rome, so that all may enjoy the fruits of this labor, that priests may know what prayers to use and what rites and ceremonies they are to use henceforward in the celebration of Mass, meaning from this point forward, and he makes this point even stronger later on. Now, therefore, in order that all everywhere, may adopt and observe what has been delivered to them by the Holy Roman Church, mother and mistress of the other churches, it shall be unlawful, henceforth, meaning from now on, and forever, throughout the Christian world, to sing or to read Masses according to any formula other than that of this missal published by us. That is, the one that's sitting on the altar of this church that I use all the time, okay? And we all do. It will be lawful henceforth and forever to use any other missal. Okay. This ordinance to apply to all churches and chapels, be with or without care of souls, patriarchal, colloquial, okay. Orders of men, orders of women, in which conventual masses are or ought to be sung aloud in choir or read privately according to the rites and customs of the Roman Church, to apply, moreover, even in the said churches that have been in any way exempted, whether by indult of the apostolic see, by custom, by privilege, or even by oath or apostolic confirmation, or have their rights and faculties guaranteed to them in any other way whatsoever, saving only those in which the practice of saying Mass differently was granted over 200 years ago, simultaneously with the Apostolic See's institution and confirmation of the Church, and those in which there has prevailed a similar custom, following continuously for a period of not less than 200 years. Once again, the right of immemorial custom. So when I say this is for the entire Western Church, there were a few little exceptions. The Mozarabic rite of Toledo, Spain, the Ambrosian rite of Milan, Italy, and there were certain things. There were certain religious orders who had slight variations of saying the Mass that amounted to almost nothing. Okay, so they could keep on doing their thing. They were not in any way majorly different from the normal traditional Mass. Nevertheless, if this missal which we have seen fit to publish be more agreeable to these last, we hereby permit them to celebrate Mass according to this rite, subject to the consent of their bishop or prelate, and of their whole chapter, all else to the contrary notwithstanding. All other churches aforesaid are hereby denied the use of other missals, which are to be wholly and entirely rejected, and by this present constitution, which shall have the force of law in perpetuity forever, till the end of time is what in perpetuity means. We order and enjoin under pain of our displeasure. God only knows what that would have been, but he was formidable. That nothing be added to our newly published missal, nothing omitted therefrom, and nothing whatsoever altered therein. So in the missal put out by Paul VI, you can't add anything, you can't take anything out, and you can't change anything that's in it forever. Now, let me just interject here really, really briefly. That doesn't mean you can't put new saints in there. If the next pope came along, like Pius VI or VII or whatever it was, and he canonized the saint, he can give them a feast day. That's not adding a rite to the missal. That's not changing the substance to the missal. That's just putting a new saint to be celebrated in there. So that was understood. Furthermore, by these presents, by virtue of our apostolic authority, infallible talk, okay, we give and grant in perpetuity forever that for the singing or reading of Mass in any church whatsoever, this missal may be followed absolutely without any scruple of conscience or fear of incurring any penalty, judgment, or censure, and may be freely and lawfully used, nor shall bishops, administrators, canons, chaplains, and other secular priests, or religious of whatsoever order, or by whatsoever title designated, be obliged to celebrate Mass otherwise than enjoined by us. We likewise order and declare that no one whosoever shall be forced or coerced into altering this missal, and this present constitution, meaning this present that I'm reading, can never be revoked or modified. but shall remain valid and have the force of law, notwithstanding previous constitutions or edicts of provincial or synod of council, and notwithstanding the uses of the churches aforesaid established by very long and immemorial prescription, saving only usage of more than 200 years. Consequently, it is our will, and by the same authority, we decree that 1 month after the publication of this our Constitution and Missal, priests of the Roman Curia shall be obliged to sing or read Mass in accordance therewith, others south of the Alps after 3 months, beyond the Alps after 6 months, or as soon as the Missal becomes available. Furthermore, in order that the said Missal may be preserved incorrupt and kept free from defects and errors, the penalty for non-observance in the case of all printers residing directly in territory directly or indirectly subject to ourselves and the Holy Roman Church shall be forfeiture of all the books in it. Okay. And the rest is just details about when, like, taking it to mission lands and things like that. So my dear fifth, I'm going to end with that. I hope this is giving you some clarity. If you forget, what I said, look up Quo Primum. Just remember 2 words: Quo-Primum. You can email me if you forget it. You can find the text online. You can find the explanation. But this gives you some clarity. What the Pope and the bishops are trying to do, which is to destroy the saying of the traditional Mass. It's not even legal for them to do. It's against the teaching of our church. May I remind you of just one thing? They're going to be fairly successful at suppressing the traditional Mass in the parishes. I have no doubt they'll be successful. Why? But you have these bishops who say, well, we're going to continue to let the Mass be celebrated, traditional Mass, in our dioceses. But remember, I know you just forgive me for the slight vulgarity of this, but it's like having the water cut off to your house. Your toilet still has 1 flush left in it, okay? But once that, the tank is still full of water. When that's flushed, there's no more after that. These bishops might be permitting it in some dioceses now, but when they're gone, they're going to appoint people who hate the Mass to these dioceses. They will suppress it everywhere. And in the diocesan churches, there will be at some point, no more traditional Mass celebrations after these bishops are gone. Pray for the church, pray for the hierarchy of the church, and pray for us, that we continue to offer the celebration of the Mass and other sacraments the way the church has declared that it must be forever, and that the Pope and bishops and priests of the world are being disobedient to. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Credo in Deo, Patrem omnipotentem, factorum caeli et terrae, visibilium omnium et invisibilium, et in unum Dominum Iesum Christum Filium Dei unigenitum, et ex patrinatum ante omnia secula. Deum de Deo, lumen de lumine, Deum verum de Deo verum. Genitum non factum, consubstantialem Patri per omnia facta sunt. Qui propter nos homines, et propter nostram salutem descendit de celis. Et incarnatus est Spiritus Sancto ex Maria Virgine, et homo Pactus est. Crucifixus etiam pro nobis sub Pontio Pilato, passus et sepultus est. Et resurrexit tertii die seconum Scripturas, et ascendit in caelum sedit ad exteram Patris. Et iterum venturus est cum gloria, judicare vivus et mortus, cuius regni non erit viis. Et in Spiritum Sanctum Dominum et vivificantem, qui ex Patre Filioque et procedit, qui cum Patre et Filio simuladoratur et cum glorificatur, qui locutus est per profetas. Et unam sanctam catholicam et apostolicam ecclesiam, confiter unam baptisma in remissionem peccatorum, et expecto resurrectionem mortuorum, et vitam venturi seculi. Amen.